Hello again. Today, we're discussing the International Criminal Court, ICC, which should not be confused with the International Cricket Council. The ICC recently released their Office of the Prosecutor Annual Report 2024, a comprehensive report that spans approximately 100 pages and was published on December 4th, 2024. I frequently receive questions from friends about why some countries seem to disregard ICC warrants or fail to enforce them effectively. This topic will be the focus of today's podcast as we delve into the latest ICC report and explore the role and authority of this important international body. Given the sensitivity of these matters, I encourage you to do your own research for a better understanding. Always stay safe.
Okay, strap yourselves in. We're going deep on this one, folks. The International Criminal Court's 2024 Annual Report.
Oh, yeah. This is it. This is where it's at.
This thing, it's massive, but it's also where we see international justice in action. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's where the rubber meets the road. So we're talking investigations all over the globe.
Yeah.
From Ukraine all the way to the state of Palestine, Afghanistan, Mali.
Wow.
They're even looking at Belarus now, starting to poke around there.
Interesting.
But that's not all. The ICC, they're not just sticking to the old playbook.
Right.
They're taking on new challenges, too,
Yeah.
like environmental crimes and cyber-enabled crimes. I mean, this is cutting-edge stuff.
It really is. It's fascinating to see how they're evolving. You know, they're not just reacting to conflict anymore. They're looking ahead, trying to anticipate what the next generation of global threats will be.
It's like they're trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys,
Yeah.
right? But before we get into all that, let's back up a bit. For folks who might not be totally familiar, what exactly is the ICC? And what kind of power do they actually have?
Okay. So the ICC, it's basically the world's court of last resort. You know, when national courts can't or won't prosecute the most serious crimes.
Like what kind of crimes? We're talking like parking tickets here?
No.
Yeah.
We're talking genocide crimes against humanity, war crimes, things like that.
The really heavy stuff.
Exactly. And they have some serious teeth. They can issue arrest warrants, conduct trials, and even impose sentences.
Oh, wow. So they can actually put people behind bars.
Yes, even life imprisonment in some cases.
Okay, so that's some serious authority. But here's the thing that I don't get. The ICC, they don't have their own army, right?
All right.
They don't have a global police force. So how do they actually enforce these warrants and sentences?
Well, that's the key question, and this is where it gets complicated. The ICC relies on states to cooperate. They need countries to help arrest suspects, gather evidence, you know, all that.
So it's like they can make the rules, but they need other countries to actually make them stick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that reliance on state cooperation, well, that's one of the biggest limitations they face.
I see. So what are some of the other things that make it hard for the ICC to do its job?
Okay, well, there's the whole issue of jurisdiction. You see, a country has to sign on to the Rome Statute. That's the treaty that created the court.
Okay.
But not every country has joined, and some of the big ones, like the United States, China, Russia,
Heavy hitters.
yeah, they're members. And that creates some major roadblocks for the ICC.
I can imagine. So even if they want to investigate something in one of those
It's
countries,
going to be tough.
their hands are tied.
Yeah, pretty much. And that gap in jurisdiction, it makes it really hard to ensure accountability for crimes in those places.
It sounds like the ICC is walking a tightrope here, trying to uphold these really high ideals, but also dealing with the messy reality of global politics.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, for sure.
So let's talk about what they've actually been up to. What are some of the key things that stood out to you in this year's report?
Well, one thing that really jumps out is the sheer number of arrest warrant applications. It's actually a record high this year.
Really?
Yeah, and that suggests to me that the ICC is getting more proactive, more willing to go after those who are suspected of these really serious crimes.
So they're not just sitting back and waiting for things to come to them.
No, they're going on the offensive. And
Yeah.
we see that in a few specific situations, like in Ukraine.
Oh yeah, Ukraine. That's been all over the news.
Exactly. The report mentions 4 new arrest warrants that were issued this year.
On top of the ones for Putin and Lvova-Belova.
Right. And these new warrants, they target military leaders who are accused of attacking civilian infrastructure.
So they're not afraid to go after high-level officials, even in the middle of a conflict like that.
No, they're not. And that's a big deal. It sends a strong message.
But let's be realistic here. What are the chances that these warrants actually lead to arrests?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It all comes down to international cooperation and pressure. But even if those arrests don't happen immediately, the fact that these warrants exist, it has a huge impact.
I see, I see. So it's about more than just putting people behind bars. It's about establishing a record.
Yeah.
It's about saying, look, these actions have consequences.
Exactly. It's about accountability. And while Ukraine is obviously a major focus right now, the ICC has a lot of other cases on its plate. They're doing investigations and trials in places like Mali,
Right.
for example. They just finished the trial of Al-Hassan. And there's a new warrant out for Iyad Gali. He's a key figure in the conflict there. Plus, they're still trying to track down Joseph Kony. He's been on the run for years.
The ICC's most wanted.
Yeah, you could say that.
Sounds like they have their hands full. But I keep coming back to this whole enforcement issue. If powerful countries just decide not to play ball, how can the ICC really deliver justice? I mean, especially if the people they're trying to prosecute are from those same countries.
It's a huge challenge, and it's something the ICC is constantly grappling with. It's like having a court but no police to enforce its decisions.
So what can they do about it?
Well, they're trying to find ways to work around that. Even in countries that haven't joined the Rome Statute, one approach is to build stronger relationships with national authorities.
Oh, okay. So like trying to get those countries to do their own investigations and prosecutions.
Exactly. They're offering assistance, sharing expertise,
Yeah.
even providing evidence to help those domestic efforts succeed.
It's kind of a backdoor approach to justice.
You could say that. And it's not always easy, but it's a way to make progress in places where the ICC's direct influence is limited.
It's like they're playing a long game here.
Yeah, they are. And there's another key area they're focusing on. This one really stood out to me in the report. They're really stepping up their efforts to tackle new forms of criminality, specifically environmental crimes.
That's really interesting. It's like the ICC is evolving along with the way we fight wars.
Yeah, exactly. And they've just developed this new policy on environmental crimes. It's the first time they formally recognize the link between environmental damage and the crimes they're mandated to prosecute.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that destroying the environment, that can be a crime against humanity?
Well, in certain circumstances, yes.
Wow.
For example, think about illegal deforestation or pollution or even land grabbing. If those actions are part of a larger pattern of violence or oppression,
Okay.
they could potentially be prosecuted as war crimes or crimes against humanity.
So they're saying that polluting a river or burning down a forest, that can be a weapon.
Yeah.
Just like a bomb or a bullet.
Exactly. And those who use that weapon can be held accountable. This new policy, it's a big deal. It recognizes that environmental destruction can have devastating consequences for communities.
It's not just about trees and rivers. It's about people's lives. It's about their livelihoods. It's about their future.
Seriously.
And this policy, it could offer a path to justice for those communities.
It could. It's still early days, but it's definitely a development worth watching closely.
So the ICC is broadening its scope. It's recognizing that the lines between war and peace, they're getting blurrier all the time.
They are.
And it's not just environmental crimes. They're also looking into cybercrime too, right?
Yeah, that's right. They're developing a new policy on that as well, trying to figure out how to apply existing international law to this whole new digital battlefield.
So how do you even define a war crime in cyberspace?
Oh,
It's like a whole different world.
that's the challenge, right? But they're looking for ways to link those digital actions to real-world harm.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connections here.
It's fascinating stuff.
It is. And it makes me think about a case that really captures all of these complexities. The ongoing investigation in Palestine.
Oh yeah, that one's a real powder keg.
It seems like it puts all the ICC's challenges and limitations front and center.
It does. It really highlights the tightrope they have to walk between upholding the law and navigating these incredibly sensitive political realities.
I think it's time we dive into that case in more detail.
Okay, let's do it. So the situation in Palestine, it's been a real flashpoint. And the ICC's investigation, well, it stirred up a lot of controversy.
Yeah, it feels like everyone's got an opinion on this one.
Yeah.
But what's the ICC actually looking into, and what kind of pushback are they facing?
So the ICC is investigating the situation in Palestine, looking into potential war crimes and crimes against humanity. And this is a long-standing conflict with accusations on both sides.
Right. It's not exactly black and white here.
No, not at all. And that's what makes this investigation so sensitive. And the ICC's prosecutor has really stressed the need for impartiality. They're trying to stay neutral.
Which I imagine is tough in a situation like this.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. There's pressure coming from all sides. And it's not just coming from the parties involved. You know, there's been some serious pushback from other countries, too.
Like who?
Well, the U.S. and Israel in particular, they've been very vocal in their opposition to the ICC's involvement.
And that opposition, It really ramped up after the ICC issued those arrest warrants for Israeli officials, right?
Exactly. That was a major turning point. Those warrants, they caused a huge uproar. And it really put the ICC in a tough spot.
I can imagine. It's like they're trying to uphold the law, but they're also dealing with these massive geopolitical forces.
Yeah. It's a constant balancing act. In this case, it really shows how limited the ICC's power can be if powerful countries decide they're not going to cooperate.
It makes you wonder how they can actually get anything done.
It's a valid question, and it's something the ICC is constantly grappling with. But even in the face of this opposition, they're pressing forward with the investigation.
So they're not backing down.
No, they're not. And I think that's important. It shows that they're committed to justice, even when it's politically difficult.
But let's be real here. If the U.S. and Israel are both against this investigation, how can those warrants ever be enforced? I mean, it doesn't seem very likely.
It's a major obstacle, no doubt about it, without cooperation from those countries, or some serious pressure from the international community. Enforcing those warrants, it's going to be next to impossible. The ICC, they're kind of stuck in a waiting game right now, hoping that things might change.
It's like they're playing the long game.
Yeah, they are. And it's a risky strategy, but it's the only option they really have at this point. In this case, it also raises another interesting question. What about the role of non-state actors?
You mean groups like Hamas?
Exactly. The ICC, they're set up to investigate and prosecute individuals, not states or organizations.
Right.
So they can go after individuals within Hamas, but they can't hold the organization itself accountable.
So it's like there's a gap there, a gap in their jurisdiction.
Yeah. And that gap, it makes it harder to achieve comprehensive justice.
Especially in situations like this, where non-state actors play such a big role.
Exactly. So you see, it's not just about powerful countries. It's about the very structure of the ICC itself and how it interacts with this messy, complex world.
Okay, so we've talked about the ICC's limitations in terms of enforcement. And we've seen how those limitations play out in a really concrete way in the Palestine investigation. But let's shift gears a bit. Let's go back to those new forms of criminality that the ICC is starting to tackle, like environmental crimes and cybercrime. It's like they're trying to stay ahead of the curve, constantly adapting to these new threats.
They are. And the environmental crimes policy, that's a prime example. They're really pushing the boundaries of international law here.
But how do you even prosecute something like environmental destruction? I mean, it's not like a traditional crime scene.
It's true. It's much more complex.
Yeah.
But their new policy, it provides a framework for approaching these cases. They're focusing on understanding the environmental context, assessing the damage, and most importantly, figuring out the intent of the perpetrators. Did they knowingly cause this harm?
So it's not enough to just show that a forest was destroyed. You have to prove that it was intentional and that it was part of a larger crime.
Exactly. They're looking for that connection between the environmental damage and the core crimes under their jurisdiction.
Okay, so give me an example. How would this actually work in a real-world situation?
Okay, so imagine an armed group. They intentionally set fire to a huge area of rainforest as a way to terrorize the local population.
Wow, that's awful.
It is. And if the ICC can prove that that destruction was intended to target civilians or to cause widespread environmental damage, that could be prosecuted as a war crime.
So they're basically saying that destroying the environment, that can be a weapon of war.
Exactly. And those who use that weapon, they can be held accountable under international law.
It's like they're recognizing that the environment, it's not just a backdrop to conflict, it's part of the conflict itself.
Exactly. And protecting the environment, well, it's becoming more and more important, especially as we face these global challenges like climate change.
It makes you wonder if this policy, could it be used to bring justice to communities that have been devastated by environmental damage caused by conflict?
It's possible. It's still early days, but there's definitely potential there.
It's a really interesting development.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about environmental crimes. They're also looking into cybercrime as well.
Yeah, right. We talked about that a bit earlier. But this whole idea of cyber warfare, it's so new and it's so different from traditional forms of conflict. So how do you even apply the concepts of war crimes and crimes against humanity to the digital realm?
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
And it's something the ICC is actively grappling with. But they're focusing on establishing that link between cyber attacks and real-world harm.
So, for example, if a hospital gets hit by a cyber attack and people die as a result,
that could potentially be considered a crime against humanity.
Wow.
Or imagine a cyber attack that disrupts emergency services during a natural disaster.
Okay.
that could lead to a lot of preventable deaths.
Right, right. So the ICC is saying, look, it doesn't matter if the weapon is digital or physical. The consequences are real.
Exactly. And those who launch these attacks, they need to be held accountable.
It feels like we're entering a whole new era of conflict here.
We are. The lines are blurring. And the ICC, they're trying to adapt to this new reality.
It's a lot to take in, but it's important stuff. And it's something we all need to be thinking about.
I agree. The future of warfare, it's changing. And the way we think about justice, it needs to change too. Yeah. It really does feel like we're at a turning point. It's like everything's changing so fast. The way we fight wars, the way we think about justice.
And the ICC, they're right in the middle of it all, trying to keep up with these changes.
They are. And it makes you wonder what the future holds for them. Can they really adapt to this new reality?
That's the big question, right? And it leads to another one. How can we support them? How can we help the ICC actually achieve its goals?
Well, I think one of the most important things is political will. States need to step up and show that they're serious about international justice.
Well, yeah, it's not enough to just talk the talk.
Exactly. They need to walk the walk, and that means actively supporting the ICC's work.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, for one thing, it means pushing for wider participation in the Rome Statute.
Right, trying to get more countries on board.
Exactly. And it also means standing up for the ICC when it comes under attack.
Like when the U.S. or Israel criticizes their investigations.
Exactly. States need to be willing to defend the court's authority.
So it's about using their influence, their diplomatic clout, to create a more supportive environment for the ICC.
Exactly. And it's not just about politics either. The ICC also needs more resources, more money, more staff, more expertise.
It's like we're asking them to do this incredibly important job, but we're not giving them the tools they need to do it properly.
That's right. They need adequate funding to conduct thorough investigations, to protect witnesses, to ensure fair trials.
It all costs money.
It does. And they also need access to the latest technology, the best training. They need to be able to keep up with these evolving threats, like cybercrime and environmental crimes.
So we need to invest in the ICC if we want them to succeed.
We do. And it's not just about idealism or charity. It's about self-interest, too. A more just world is a more stable world.
I think that's a really important point. We all benefit from a world where perpetrators of these serious crimes, they're held accountable.
We do. And when the ICC is strong, when it's effective, it strengthens the whole system of international justice.
It sends a message that these crimes, they won't be tolerated.
Exactly. And that message, it has a ripple effect. It can deter future crimes. It can encourage countries to strengthen their own justice systems.
It's about creating a culture of accountability.
It is.
And that's a goal worth striving for.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, this deep dive has been eye-opening. It's given us a lot to think about.
It has. The ICC, they're doing some really important work, but they're facing some huge challenges.
And ultimately, it's up to all of us to decide what kind of world we want to live in. Do we want a world where impunity reigns?
Or do we want a world where justice prevails?
That's the question we all have to ask ourselves.
And our actions.
They
will provide the answer.
Well said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the ICC's 2024 annual report. It's been a fascinating journey, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us. It's been my pleasure, and I hope our listeners will continue to engage with these issues, to learn more about the ICC's work, and to think about how they can contribute to a more just and peaceful world.
That's a great message to end on. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep diving deep.